Welcome everyone to the Wellesley's Digital Conclave along with Ambit. My name is Aditya and I head advisory at Wellesley. We wish everyone safe and good health and during these hard times. Today's topic of discussion is around current markets, what lies ahead, and have a talk on how to make a wealth in this running decade. Well, as the market makes new high, every fresh money comes with a lot of questions, and we face this, day in day out. And we are at terrific index levels. Let's face the fact. From the lows of March 2020, Nifty was at then 8,000 number. Today, fighting those uncertainty, volatility, depressions, we are now. Not only we are back, we are racing. Now above 15,500 index levels, it's gone double. Who would have thought of these levels, just a year back, or maybe 1.5 years back? Those were the highs, and now we are again on the highs. So dilemma is how to go about from here on. Many are sitting on fences. Many have booked profits early. Many are still trying to time, and so on. People who are sitting on profits are in two minds. There are many questions around real recovery. Contrast situation. So here at Wellesley, we take responsibility to educate our audience. We take this as pride that we are able to bring month-on-month personalities from AMCs and research houses to throw light on the market situations. Today, we have not one, but this time two speakers from Ambit Asset Managers. Let's welcome our speaker, Siddharth Rastogi. He's an excellent orator. Apart from it, he is COO of Ambit. He has been with Ambit for over 11 years. Before joining Ambit, Siddharth co-founded IIFL Wealth and set up the mutual funds and structured product distribution at IIFL. Prior to that, Siddharth has been, have an illustrious career as a private banker with HSBC, Citibank, UTI, erstwhile Axis Bank, and he's an honors graduate in commerce from Delhi University and company secretary intermediate, and has a PGDM from NMIMS Mumbai. Along with him, we have a highly acclaimed fund manager, Mr. Manish Jain. He is the fund manager of Coffee Can Strategy. He has over 16 years of experience in equity research. Before moving to Ambit, he worked with Nomura for a decade as leading analyst covering FMCG, electrical durables, and retail sectors. Prior to Nomura, Manish worked with Lehman Brothers, Enam, ICICI Securities, and Motilal Oswal under equity research space. He had consistently been voted as the best performing analyst in the research teams for many years by ADIA, Capital World, Capital International. For Siddharth, let me start with you. I'm putting a remark, then you can take it from there. India's past decade in terms of financial market has been full of events like European crisis, demonetization, GST, trade war, biggest corporate tax cuts, which were never seen before, digitization. Top of all, we ended up having COVID also. Then the surprise global liquidity infusion, humongous it was. And now with all this, we are sitting at the top of good. We can call it as good as a Mount Everest in the mid 2021 today. Yes, we are not alone. Globally, almost all the emerging market, developed, underdeveloped markets are there seeing these highs. How do you see the next decade spanning out? Or is it not the Mount Everest yet, or we are yet to reach those peaks? It's just, you can start it from there. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Aditya. Let me answer this question before even I talk about what lies ahead into two parts. A, equity is the future, equity was the future, and equity will be the future. So that's number one. Second, faint-hearted people with huge emotional disbalance, people with weak mind will not be able to participate in India's growth story. You are seeing Sensex at 55,000 levels. By the end of this decade, you will see the Sensex hitting a 1.5 lakh number. Before I move ahead, let me narrate a short story to you and to our esteemed viewers. A father and son Son, 22 years old, just came into a job. Father came from very humble background, toiled, struggled, and today at a very comfortable position in an MNC. Father 42 years, son 22 years. The father decided that son doesn't have any practical experience of how hard the life is, because he's relatively born with a silver spoon in the upper middle class family. So he decided, let's do it reverse. So he decided to gift his son 1 crore rupees, and he said, son, this is your money, you do whatever with it. Invest wherever you want, in listed equities or wherever you feel comfortable, and we will talk about it after 20 years. The father also said, I have this 1 crore rupees with me and I'm also going to invest. So the father invested after looking at the balance sheets. He picked up businesses which are generally B2C, which are consistently growing in terms of PAT, profit after tax, in terms of earnings per share, in terms of cash earnings per share, etc. Very basic research, and he invested. And then he forgot about it. Son, remember, knowledgeable son. He read a lot. He consumed news and information a lot. So he invested into the cyclicals because metals were doing well. So he invested into metals. Then he invested into infrastructure. And then one fine day, there was huge murmur that the markets are going to correct. With the first fall in the market, he exited. As we all know, we have seen from 2008, we have seen in 97, we have seen in 2000, we have seen in 1992, the market never falls on one day. Market falls in series, rises in series, bunched up. So the son was able to exit. But the problem was, as he exited from the market, reducing his profits or cutting his losses, he kept getting more and more news about the negative. And he kept waiting for the markets to be reasonably priced so that he can enter again. So he waited and he waited. And markets took a turn and they started rising in a frenzy. He didn't understand what's happening. And so forth. 20 years passed. The father retired at the age of 62, and now the son, who was young, enthusiastic, vibrant, became a matured individual. And they both sat together again and said, what happened? Let's look at our 20 years. The son was jubilant because despite of ups and downs, and at some points in time, the son had actually lost because of the high beta names. He had lost 40-50%. But despite of that, he made 12% compounding in 20 years. 12% compounding in 20 years. Phenomenal. So his 1 crore became 10 crores. And he was really happy that I have done fantastically well, much better than his father. The father said, let's look at my portfolio, and he had never opened his portfolio before. To his surprise, that 1 crore had compounded at 22%, just 10% higher over 20 years. And the figure of 10 crores for the son was equivalent to 54 crores. Ladies and gentlemen, 10% compounding differential meant 44 crores of loss in 20 years. Next slide, Prithvi. What does it imply? What does it imply? It implies very simple thing. People don't lose money in market corrections. People lose more money by remaining underinvested. You speak with your advisor says, sir, invest. You have decided. The family has decided that this is the equity allocation. However, let's do some staggering. Let's spread it out across 20 months. Let's spread across 15 months. Market has run up. More number of people remain underinvested, and hence they lose more money than the stock correction. Second, we believe trading creates humongous amount of money. If that would have been the case, all the brokerage houses worldwide wouldn't have been billionaires. Even in the worst recession, the brokerage houses, top dealers take $1 million bonuses. Every cost counts. More churn means more cost, which means more destruction. Last, pessimism sells better. If I have to tell you that in next 6 months there is going to be a third wave of COVID, the economy is going to degrow by 3 or 4%, and there will be a China and India conflict, your heart will absorb those information very quickly, like a jiffy. And if I have to say that India is constructing 45 crores of road every day, there are 2 crores plus houses which have been built and which have been delivered. MSP has increased by 15 to 20% in agriculture, which is going to increase the agro income in the economy to the level which has never been seen. You will not believe, because pessimism sells better. So my request, before we talk about technical everything, learn these 3 basic principles. The world is not as bad as you think. Next slide. Let's shift gears, and as Aditya said, let's talk about the decade, the future, the forthcoming. But as Karl Marx said, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. And Karl Marx, everybody knows, was the father of communism. Whatever happened in the history is gonna happen in future with very little variation. And if we look at Spanish flu 1918, 1919, 2 years, the world population at that point in time was 180 crore. Nearly 1/3 of the world population got infected with it. 4 crore people, 2 to 4 crore people died because of the Spanish flu. The world economy degrew. Despite of that, in 1923, just 1923, which is only 3-4 years after, US GDP grew by 13%. Second World War, the most deadly world war in the history, killed nearly 4.5 crore people, impacted over 8 to 9 crore people in terms of injuries, displacement. Germany lost badly in the Second World War. A decade later, the index for industrial production was 4x as compared to 10 years earlier. Asian flu, similar story. Swine flu, similar story. COVID, we saw 7.5% degrowth. India, last 2 quarters have grown rapidly. So remember, after every catastrophe, after every calamity, after every natural or man-made challenge, 3 things increase multifold. Keep in mind 3 things. 1, your risk-taking ability. 2nd, hyper-consumerism. Your consumption increases multifold. And 3rd, the need for instant gratification increases multifold. Next slide. If we look at these are physical challenges or problems related to illness. But even if I look at the global financial crisis, which is linked with the financial markets, and 97-98, after the Asian currency crisis, Indonesia GDP actually corrected by nearly 45-46%, Thailand 21%. The entire Southeast Asian, so-called Asian tigers, their economy collapsed. After that, what happened? Immediately 3 or 4 years back, the economy rallied like anything. Dot-com bubble, the similar example. 2008, exactly the same thing. US markets corrected in 2008 by nearly 60%. After that, from 2010 till 2020, before the COVID arrived, there was no correction literally in the US markets. Now you can keep worrying that dot-com bubble is still not behind us. Stimulus is still being given. and I have only missed 10 years rally. Only 10 years rally. Similarly, European financial crisis, where Greece and Italy was about to get bust, and we saw with the change in the stimulus, with the change in the policy, the growth in Eurozone nearly increased by 2%, which is a significant number from a negative growth of 2 or 3% where the inflation is benign. Why am I telling you all this? Because after COVID, exactly, and I'm not talking about 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, I'm not talking. 3 quarters from today, and you can mark my word, 3 quarters from today, you will witness hyper consumerism. People will spend like never before. People will become even more short-sighted. Earlier, the norm was first you earn and then you spend. No more. You earn and you spend parallelly. More and more people who do not have the means to spend, they will start leveraging. They will start hyper leveraging. This will be fueled by the lower interest rates. Worldwide, the interest rates below 2%, below 1.5% are almost 75%. So the total debt market in the world, sorry, I'm digressing from the equities, but debt has a very important component. The total debt market is bigger than the equity markets worldwide. It is $119 trillion, 1.5x of the total world GDP. 75%, ladies and gentlemen, the debt market is below 1% yield. Large part is in negative yield. And it's a very convenient scenario for everyone. I borrow free money. I lend something making little margin. The retailer or the consumer takes that money, spends that money, drives the growth, pays the money lesser than what he or she has borrowed. Fantastic. So you borrow $100 or 100 rupees and you pay after a year 99 or 99.5. The same thing is being done by governments worldwide. The same thing is being done by the governments worldwide. Why? Because governments believe by pushing interest rates lower and lower, they can keep borrowing more money. You borrow more money with no interest payout, and you put that money to pump the economy. As the economy starts moving upward, you will have better tax collection, and those taxes can be utilized to pay the principal. There is no interest, there is no debt trap. US Fed actually said not before 2023 there'll be interest rate hikes. 2 times they will do interest rate hikes, but not before 2023. Which means what? We are in 21, half. So 1.5 years, you can possibly imagine there are no interest rate hikes, which means we will be in the interest rate zone, which will be absolutely low. Second important point, even in 2023, the interest rates are not going to increase multifold or even in this decade. The reason is the world is at the highest debt level ever in the history. The governments worldwide are at the highest debt level ever in the history. And the most leveraged governments are the Western governments, the so-called developed world. And they are in no mood to increase the interest rates, because then they have to pay the interest on their own bond issuances. And who wants to pay when you can get everything for free? Neither governments, nor individual, nor organizations. So interest rates are going to remain benign. The benefit of it will be felt not only by the Western world, by the emerging economies.
Here, I just want to ask you one question over here. Yes. Yeah, this no, as you said, the Fed has already hinted in this next 2 years they would gonna have 2 hikes. Correct. But overall impact, because US is a very large nation, but they have been into this economy of lower interest rate, sub 4% or a 3% kind of, and they have faced and they have managed it in a way. India is not such a country as on date. We have seen last two decades rate of ROI. Now we are less than 8%. We have seen 12% days also. We have seen 16% days also. So while doing these, the inflation, what we assume is that, once you put the rates down, inflation goes hyperactive. And it could be, fiscal problem for the, country like us, where, larger population is yet to come up the curve. So how do you see that spanning out?
Very, very, very pertinent question you have raised. The question which is in the minds of most of the economists as well. So the answer is fairly simple, Aditya. First, India is not a interest rate maker. It's an interest rate taker, right? If the Western interest rate increases, we have to increase our interest rates, otherwise there will be a capital flight. And if the Western interest rate declines, we also cut the interest rate, because then it makes sense for us. Our fiscal deficit between state, center, and local governments put together is closer to 12-13%, all three, right? So we are a capital starved country, we are not a capital surplus country, right? So we are interest rate takers. So that's number one. So we will always look up to the Western world when it comes to the interest rate. So that's number one. Number two, you are right. Increased liquidity means increased inflation, right? Now the point is, what are the mitigants to it? The first, if the inflation is higher, it means that from the Indian context, the agri produce gets better MSP. Remember, MSP, or the pickup which the middleman or the end bigger company which is doing from the agri side, they don't take into the real into account. They take into the nominal factor into account, right? So it means that the earnings of the agri side of the economy, which still has 58% of the people who are dependent on the agri economy, gets benefited from it. So that's number one. So not all inflation is bad. So that's number one. Number two, you have seen that because of COVID and because of the demonetization earlier in 2016, we saw the digitization of the economy. Businesses which were B2B purely. Let me give you a very simple example. There is a large biscuits company, Britannia, very, very large biscuits company, the largest in the country. They had manufacturing units. From the manufacturing units, they had national distributors, state distributors, local distributors, wholesalers, etc. The entire value chain, and then was retailer, and then was the end customer. For the first time in the history, they started doing B2C directly, business to consumer, which means a lot of guys who were into through the channel started entering into the customer's mind directly. Because then what I have to do, I can reduce the channel expense. I only have to spend a minuscule percentage, maybe 1%, 2% incremental on the logistics and on the technology, which is perpetual. And I enter directly into the B2C segment, which means intermediation is going to get lower. As intermediation gets lower with the technology, with the platformization of all assets, the benefit which was going to the intermediary or the channel will get passed on in the form of higher margins to the manufacturer and some benefit to the end customer. So without increasing the price of the end customer, which means that the inflation will get controlled because the end price is actually getting reduced, the middleman is getting out and the margins are getting increased. Because of this, you will see that the inflation will come under control, and more disintermediation across, not only in biscuits, across all products and services, it will happen. And this will be the biggest game changer in terms of inflation. So that's number two. Number three, the reason why we had seen inflation rising in the recent times with a lag impact has been because of the challenge in the supply side. Now when the supply is getting eased off, and you can see in last 14 months to 18 months, the rise of logistics as a sector and the cut down in the profitability of the logistics sector, because everybody is playing the volume game rather than the margin game. Because of that, certain people who were charging heavy margins, because of that, their inflation was felt in the remotest corner. Now the cost is equivalent. Whether I send a courier to Delhi versus I send it in Kandivali. I'm from Bombay, I'm sitting in Bandra. So if I send something in Kandivali, which is the local suburbs, the cost is the same. The delivery time is the same. So what happens? Slowly and gradually, you would see that the inflation actually gets eased out as the supply normalizes. Second, the benefit of the disintermediation gets passed on both to the manufacturer and to the end customer, which pushes the inflation down. Now, I agree that there can be a short-term blip, not for long. Third, what happens is better value for your own money. So earlier, the same packaged atta used to cost 3x. Now with the ragi, with the soya bean, etc., the actual packaged atta cost has come down, and you're getting more nutrition. Now, why is it happening? Because an ITC is able to procure directly from the farmer rather than taking through the intermediary, and it is able to pass on the nutrients as well as the price controlled or the reduced price to the end customer. All that in a matter of 2 to 3 years, not long, 2 to 3 years, will ensure that the inflation is gonna get benign. Last but not the least, very clearly, India is on its move to cut down everything which is imported. So it's very interesting. A lot of people not even are looking at it. On the agro side of the economy, the transformation, it has happened in last decade. Last 11 years, the transformation, it has happened. Previously, we were only producing paddy and rice, that's about it. We were surplus, we were producing, we were exporting. Lot of it was getting destroyed during the monsoons because we used to produce so much that there was no storage capacity. FCI godowns were shut because they can't procure beyond because it will get spoiled. What government is incentivizing? They are keeping the MSP of the basic crops same. The cash crops, whether it is soya bean, whether it is high protein vegetarian diet, chana, which earlier we used to, or pulses, we used to import. The government is saying, start producing that, increase the MSP, the farmer benefits, the cost comes down for everyone, and ultimately the inflation gets softer. So it is the right allocation of the goods. So why am I telling you all this? Because in future you would see the dependence on oil, the dependence on the imports from external countries will be least in India. Last but not the least, the EVs. So what government is not talking about is not about lithium batteries, by the way, because lithium is not produced in India.
Okay.
These are the substitute for crude. What government is talking about is hydrogen-based batteries. And if hydrogen-based batteries come in, we will indigenously produce it. We will not import. So whatever you say, people are really skeptical about Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar may not have worked in the manufacturing side. It has worked on two sectors, services and agri. It is not by design, it's by default. India has a blessing.
When we started off in early 20s, it was, all growth stocks and all, whatever coming with a growth, we are normally buying it. Even the fund managers, But now people are last 3-4 years are now looking at books, not looking at clean governance. So what are those products or strategies or what thinking you do which stands you apart, and how you have been able to do it consistently? Plus, if we this same strategy, if we follow as on date, how is this valuable for the next 10, 15, 20 or 30 years?
Okay. Yeah. So thanks, Aditya. The question is very, very pertinent. How do you keep your head above the water, right? I mean, how do you maintain your sanity in an investment vehicle which is essentially fraught with volatility, right? It keeps going up and down over a period of time. How do you maintain that discipline? And what we have tried to do is 3 or 4 very, very simple things, right? Which are not rocket science, which is not something that you reinvent the wheel, but it is more about discipline. It's more about the process. And we always kind of believe that a good, return is an outcome of a great process that you follow. So there are 4 very, very simple things that you need to do, whether it's good and clean, whether it's coffee can, right? It doesn't really matter. Number 1, what we try to do is to focus on the overarching philosophy. And that's very important, right? Even as an investor, when you're trying to invest in a fund, how do you judge whether the fund is great quality or not? Because ultimately, over a long period of time, everybody yields returns, right? Some 2% higher, some 2% lower. And historical returns are in no way a guarantee to the performance that is going to accrue in the future, right? So what I believe is that you should look at the overarching philosophy, the set of guiding principles, right? And how watertight are, and how has the fund in the past adhered to them or not adhered to them, right? Or as an investor, what are your guiding principles and how do you intend to adhere to those principles, guiding principles, right? And that essentially becomes a hallmark of a great portfolio. And that's what we do in Coffee Can, and that's what we do in Good and Clean. If there is a money-making opportunity that you have to let go of, we do it without batting an eyelid, right? There were at least 6 or 7 ideas that we've identified, which have all gone on to become multi-baggers, right, in a very short span of time. But because they did not fit into the philosophy, we let go of them. And that is essentially what brings stability in our performance, and that is what minimizes the drawdowns in tougher times. And believe me, a fund which minimizes the drawdowns in tougher times is much superior than a fund that delivers returns in bull markets, because it is very easy to deliver returns in bull markets. Now, point number 2 is there is no substitute to home. You have to have depth in your research capabilities, and you have to keep doing it on an ongoing basis. And that is essentially the reason why for a 1,600 crore AMC, we have an 8-member research team. We lay overemphasis on research capabilities, and you have to look at every single thing. Like you said, if just looking at the board of directors was any guarantee to great corporate governance, ILFS would not have ever happened, right? So you have to go much beyond that. You have to look at auditor payments, you have to look at receivables, intercorporate deposits, you have to look at related party transactions, and the whole gamut of it. The third is to think like a business owner and not like a stock investor. What do stock investors do? They go by hearsay. They go by tips. They typically try to make income, right? Short-term income. Their time horizon is very short-term. But if you think like a business owner, your time horizon is long. You are more concerned about profit growth in the portfolio, and sustainable profit growth in the portfolio automatically leads to returns. You don't have to worry about the return. It becomes a byproduct. And you see that chart over here, right? Look at Nifty, the chart above, right? Nifty versus Coffee Can. Now, Nifty has delivered earnings growth which has sustainably kept coming down over time, right? The red bar started off, the gray bar started off at 28%, came down to as low as -2%. Coffee Can has delivered double-digit earnings growth in 9 out of the last 10 years. And the market has automatically rewarded Coffee Can companies with higher multiple consistently over a period of time, as compared to Nifty, where the multiples have remained very, very range. Right? So think like a business owner, think long-term, think earnings growth, and the returns will automatically follow. And fourth and very simple thing, which is the biggest differentiator for us, which differentiates us from everybody else, is discipline. Maintain that discipline. Do number 1, 2, and 3 with a great amount of discipline, and you'll always be in good stead. Right? And that's essentially the simple mantra.
Manish, one thing here. For a vast audience, they are always, because yes, nobody wants liquidity tomorrow. Everybody knows. They don't know. Problem is they don't know when the liquidity will come. So they are always have a question mark on near term. Maybe current news. It's smaller news. US Fed. Suddenly people start asking questions. It was just we know market cannot fall for the same news again and again. So last year COVID happened. COVID, you have a second phase of COVID again this last April. But we didn't see any same kind of a fall, and this was again a very severe one. This was far severe in India than compared to the last year what happened in India. So, and maybe a third phase also comes. So there may be some slowdown. But how do you manage these mental state? These mental state of as an investor to navigate and look a broader picture. So that keeps investors thinking to enter now, to staggered way of investing, or I have missed the bus, let me wait for the next big doom to come to invest. So there are people who invested 2008 and today it's 2020. They also waited this time also. They burnt in 2008, they burnt 2020 also, and now they are sitting. So it has to be an attitude change. So one thing you should, the way you should look at it is, some behavior or something on those lines.
So there are two things that you need to do as an investor, right? If you are going to learn from your past mistakes, right? Now, number one is quality. And that's very important. Now, how do you define quality? Quality in terms of promoters, ownership, management quality. It has to be impeccable. Number two, quality in terms of balance sheet, as light as possible, right? And number three, quality in terms of earnings growth, so sustainability of earnings growth in the past, going into the future as well. So you take a 360-degree comprehensive view. Now, when you look at some of these stories, which are turnaround stories, some are cyclical sectors, some are B2B sectors like metals, mining, utilities, oil and gas. They're very luring at certain points in time, even for something as big as Reliance Industries, right? It feels very luring when it goes up from 800 to 2,000 rupees in a matter of 3-4 months. Everybody feels that, they have left out. Everybody feels that they've missed the bus. But the fact of the matter is you have to invest for quality, because if you have to create wealth in equities, and equities, remember, is always a wealth creation platform. It's not an income generation platform, contrary to the popular notion. And if you have to make 100 rupees into 3,000 rupees over a 15-year or 17-year time frame, there is no substitute for quality. You have to look at an Asian Paints at $500 million market cap when it becomes $30 billion, right? Or Pidilite or HDFC Bank. Multiple examples you can give here, Berger Paints. But the fact of the matter is, first is no substitute for quality. And I'll give you a very simple example here. Look at something like a Pidilite versus Reliance. And this is a question that came to us last year a lot, saying that, why do you have not Reliance Industries? June, July, we underperformed because we did not have Reliance in our portfolio, right? Reliance itself accounted for 6% move in index in just 1 month. And what I told them was a statistic that you look at something which is as boring as Pidilite. In the last 10 years, on the same day when Reliance became 2,000 rupees, Pidilite delivered a return of close to 24%. As compared to Reliance, which including the 800 to 2,000 move had delivered a return of 16%. Pidilite outperformed Reliance by a margin of 8 percentage points over a 10-year time frame. That's the power of quality. So number one is quality. Number two is a very simple guiding principle, which is greed and fear. You have to swim against the tide. When everybody is greedy, you have to be fearful. When small cap rally starts peaking out and small cap multiple becomes higher than Nifty multiple on a forward-looking basis, you have to be fearful. When you start getting tips in the local trains, in buses, in taxis, when a layman who's never invested in equity starts giving you tips that this is a stock to buy, that is a stock to buy, that is a time when you have to get out of the market and start booking profits. And when everybody's selling, which is March to May 2020, which is 2007 to 2008, when it looks like the whole world is falling apart, when it looks like there is no end to this catastrophe, when it looks like there is going to be no tomorrow, that is a time when you have to buy, because that is when you'll get Titan for 300 rupees in the demonetization. You'll never ever get Titan for 300 rupees.
Yeah. So just here, market at such levels right now, 50,500 and above when we are talking. So are we investable at this level?
So I'll start and then I'll let Siddharth end because I'm sure he has some very strong views on this point as well. Yeah. But absolutely.
Yeah.
What we've seen in the last 12 months is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, it's just a starting point. Things are now warming up. Look, it looks very odd when I say that, especially given that, the kind of rally we've had in the last 12 months, 60-70% in Nifty alone.
Don't think that don't treat it as that we are an equity people. We are always have to be on buy side.
No. So I'll give you a logic for that.
Investor's perspective.
Yeah, I'll give you a perspective of that. But if you look at the last, so Nifty has really done remarkably well in the last 12 months. There's no doubt about it. But if you take the last 4-year view, Nifty returns are actually just about 13-14%. If you take a 6-year view, Nifty returns are just in high single digits. right? So it's essentially what has happened in the last 1 year is nothing but mean reversion of the returns that you lost. And in the last 6 years, we've gone through a very turbulent phase also as a country, right? We've gone from one Six Sigma event to the other. 6 or 7 that I can recall at the top of my mind, starting demonetization, GST implementation fiasco, ILFS, the auto sector regulations that came through, the GDP growth rate slowing down, the pandemic, all of it came through. So we never had a stable economic growth. Our economic growth kept sliding down. Our earnings growth kept sliding down. 6 years, Nifty earnings expectation cut on a compounded basis, 16%, 16%, right? So that's what we've gone through. Now, if you take a view on the markets as a multiple basis, Nifty is still trading at 18 times on FY23 and 21 times on FY22. So the multiples are still in the long-term range. It is the earnings growth which is going to drive index. And earnings growth is going to be stable. Why? Because vaccination drive is starting to pick up, because the governments have learned to minimize the economic impact of coronavirus waves. The third wave will have a much lower impact than the second wave also. The second wave will not have more than 1.5%, 2% impact on the overall economic growth. So when you combine all of that, I would expect a double-digit compounded return in the markets from the next 12 years perspective, 2 years perspective.
There are 500 top 500 companies where most of the active fund managers work over, and out of that even there are few gems. Apart from Nifty 50. So Nifty 50 is no rocket science. So if we only want to get a Nifty 50 returns, so a consumer or an investor here is don't need us. They don't need even advisors or fund managers to do that. But when we talk about mid cap and a smaller cap segment, there it is tricky. You can't pick just like that. You have to be very choosy and to become. ITC not became ITC. For last 100 years, ITC is not ITC. It has become gradually this ITC. Tata have not become Tata just like that. It has become slowly and steadily. Bajaj Finance, the recent ones, or even there's so many stories around even the chemical and pharma sectors. Gone are the days that Purane elephant, aaj bhi elephant hai. There are new league of companies are coming. So how you identify those initial gems which can have tomorrow's leaders, so is this the time to pick up those? When you talk about facing these times, are these a time today to buy those mid and small right now and stick with them for the next 5 years, 6 years to get those returns of 20 plus year on year?
I'll let Siddharth start on this and maybe I'll add my views towards the end. Siddharth?
Thanks, Manish, for that. So, Aditya, very simply, what you are saying is that today should we look at the businesses which are small and mid, which can become multi-baggers in a span of 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And how to identify them? That's the basic question. Now, the first thing I would say before even you identify, first write down on a piece of paper that you have the patience for 7 years, 10 years, 12 years.
Yeah.
Because if you
very important
today, if you are saying today that you have the patience for 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, would you actually have the patience after 12, 24 months if the mid or the small cap correct? So we saw most of the people who were buoyant on the small and mid cap in 2017, and when the markets peaked out of small and mid cap in January 2018, they started exiting. So the first thing, you should be ready. Why do most fund managers actually go into, as you rightly said, top 500? Indian markets have the largest listed entities in the world. If I remove the BSE and NSE overlap, we are still 5,300, larger than NASDAQ and NYSE. And the reason why most people are not able, because the first thing, you do not have patience. When things start correcting, you do not have patience, and hence fund managers, they comfortably shy under those BSE 500 or the top 500 companies. So you are right. The first step the investor has to do is to write down on the paper when the correction happens. You should not, because this correction has nothing to do with the market or the company. It is the systemic challenge which a global event can be triggering. So you don't have to be worried about it. So that's number one. Now, how do you identify these mid and small companies which are the next multi-baggers? First fundamental rule, and this is the most important, which Manish takes it as his first rule when he picks up businesses in Coffee Can, and this is the same which is applicable for mid and small, is monopoly, monopolistic, oligopoly. These three words but denote the same thing. Now, monopoly does not mean large cap having monopoly in a very large dominant market. You can have a monopoly in a small product. You can have a monopoly in a small geography. You can have a monopoly in the process which is essential for a large entity. I'll give you a very simple example. There is a small cap company which we hold in our portfolio, which is required by all pharma and drug companies only to the extent of 3%. But without that 3% catalyst, none of the pharma and the drugs will be manufactured. And there are only 2 or 3 companies like that in the country. And this company has a market share of 45-46%. Small market, consolidated, essential. Why monopoly, oligopoly is important? Because when there is problem in the outside world, you can still ensure that your margins remain intact because there is no alternative. Because there is no alternative. So the TINA factor, we always undermine the TINA factor to a very large extent. But that plays a very essential role in all our decision making. Whether we buy, whether we put anything, we first look at what is the alternative. That's why if you're monopoly, you are going to sustain during tough and good times both. So look at the businesses which have monopoly, whether a small cap company, mid cap company, large cap company, does not matter. So that's number one. Number two, look at the businesses which have B2C presence. I'm repeating this fact. If you have a B2C presence, you are insulated from dollar movement, external chaos. India as a country is growing at 1.2% every year, which means on 137 crore population, we are adding nearly 1.5 crore people every year. They will require more consumption. They will require everything more. Younger population. So look at products which are B2C and which are essential. So that's number two. Number three, look at businesses which have defensible moats. What do you mean by defensible moats? Very simply, there are companies which ensure that artificial intelligence, demand predictability is not something which is new and glamorous, which they have been using for donkey's years. Adaptability. When GST happened, there were companies which were preparing for GST 3 years in advance. Flexibility and listening to the customer, listening to the end consumer. If those are the companies which you have in your portfolio, even they are small, trust me, even if you have some 1-2 years of up and down in terms of earnings, in terms of challenges, despite of that, you're going to make multi-bagger returns. It doesn't matter small cap, mid cap, large cap. It matters what is the company actually doing, which segment it is present in, and is it the market leader in its segment or not? Because if not, there is a ply company, there is a plywood company, there is a laminate company which we hold, which is a market leader, but the laminate market itself is only 10% of the total furniture market. But the good news is that 10% of your incremental cost, if it is poor, your entire 100 rupees of furniture will look ugly. So the idea is monopoly, defensible moats, and you have to pick businesses which can sustain their margins on a consistent basis. Then you would see, as this chart is also depicting, lot more companies will benefit out of this. Manish, anything you want to add?
I think you summed it up perfectly. See, the recipe is the same, whether you're cooking for 100 people, 10 people, or 1 person. The ingredients don't change, and that is why the investment rationale or the process kind of remains the same, whether you're identifying a company in the large cap bracket or a mid cap bracket or the small cap bracket, right? That doesn't change. And like Siddharth said, there are certain set of ingredients which you need to have in place, which is essentially about being monopolistic, which is about being quality, which is about having a B2C mode, which is about having a outlook which is towards sustainable earnings growth, and then you see the magic. And there's a very interesting chart, which I wanted to just point out. We follow these very simple processes with a great amount of dedication and discipline. And you see the end result. These are all small cap and mid cap companies. And you look at the earnings return CAGR that they have delivered in the last 10 years and where they have moved in terms of ranking, being beyond 1,000 in terms of market cap to between 100 to 250, right? And across the board, you see the way the transition has happened in a short span of 10 years, right? So that's the simple 3 or 4 things that you need to do, but you do with a great amount of discipline, and then you stick to your conviction, especially in tougher times, especially when the markets are falling, when everything around you is falling apart, and then you reap the benefits eventually over the long run. You treat equities as a wealth creation platform and not as an income generation platform. That's, I think, the simple recipe.
So how about diversifying across large, mid, and small to give a diversify? Because when we talk about what Siddharth was pointing out, these all ingredients cannot be all in one company. It's very difficult. Some are good in marketing strategies, some are good in governance, some are good in other parts, or with a good in logistics. So there's a whole lot of strengths of each of the companies. So making a one portfolio sense, bringing them together and creating a healthy portfolio over this period of time. So how do you place your strategies for the next 3 years? If I today ask you, I have a 3 years of money to place, I have a 5 years of money to place, and a 10 years of money to place. How do you position your strategies in respect to customers or an investor's mind?
So I will answer it in a very short way, and then I'll leave it for Siddharth to answer. But it will depend a lot on the risk appetite that you have. Now, if you have a higher risk appetite, small caps is a way to go. If you have a medium risk appetite, I would advise you to have either pure mid caps or a mix of mid caps and small caps. But if you are a low risk investor, you ideally should go for larger caps, a little more renowned names. But from the way I'm looking at it, and we've looked at small cap, we've looked at mid caps, and we've looked at large caps, and we've looked at it from every perspective in terms of the return they have generated so far, the multiples where they are trading at, the kind of earnings growth potential you're looking at it from a clear perspective. Believe me, there's money to be made at every level. All right, there is, it's not going to be a very selective rally in the next 2 years that it's going to happen, because remember,
just look at the current Manish, look at the current level. We are at high. So just to answer again, I'll just rephrase it. Right now, what we see 15,500. For example, there may be some 5-10% correction here, then it doesn't matter for the markets. It is actually a good entry point. It's an healthy.
Yeah.
But what do you see next 1 year spanning out? Because we have already run so much from the bottom. So do we see kind of sideways for a longish period of time? Or do we see still within Nifty remains sideways, but underlying some beautiful sectors are there which have not yet delivered? Could be travel. I don't know. Could be a travel what we see. Could be an industry which is again related to these lines. Yet to come up. Media, or could be So do you see those sectors are next will take this momentum forward?
No. So that's what. Yeah, I was coming to. Yeah. Sorry, Siddharth. Yeah.
Let me take this question and straight on. So first thing, Aditya, remember that unfortunately or fortunately, whether you like it or not like it, COVID will change and has changed the consumer behavior itself. And if you are saying that the COVID is the last thing which has happened in this decade, it's not. If you remember 1918-1919, which Manish and we both spoke about, the Spanish flu, immediately after that, there was hyper credit growth which happened, which led to the Great Depression in 1929, which lasted for 35 years. After that, there was Second World War, which happened in 1939. The catastrophe which has come to us in last 16 months is not the last. There will be multiple more which will come. The point is, what you can make is quick trading buck by getting into certain sector and getting out of certain sector. Maybe for next 3 months, as you are saying, aviation, hospitality, etc. But remember, what we spoke about always is that is returns. Returns are only made when you are lucky. It's pure luck. You have entered, and you are predicting that there won't be any third wave. Third wave comes and you have crashed. Third wave doesn't come, you rally, you exit, you book profits, right? You are making returns. If you are making returns, it's as good as speculation, which anyone can do, or which anyone who is interested can do. Not too many people are successful in doing it. Only brokers are, because they make money on both sides. However, wealth creation will only happen by structural changes. And structural changes means what? Structural changes simply means businesses like chemicals, where China is almost shut. China is not manufacturing so many chemicals, and there is a demand shift because alternate to China is only India. Discretionary demand, which will always be in India. BFSI, because of the lower interest rates, there will be hyper credit growth. We have seen in last 16-18 months, the private sector credit growth has been in low single digits, less than 5%, which means it has to bounce back. We are only seeing today the credit growth only coming from the food credit and from the government credit. There is no credit growth which is coming from the private sector. Next 24 months, there will be hyper credit growth. What will happen to the BFSI? Remember, the credit quality also will improve as compared to the past. Why? From the simple fact that today, the predictability of those who can default can be assessed because of AI, because of the pattern, because of multiple tools which were not existent earlier. Insurance, in BFSI also comes insurance, both GI and both general insurance and life insurance. Asset managers. Now you have to create a healthy mix of it. And remember, what I spoke about the TINA factor will always be relevant, because it's not surprising why retail participation is all-time high in India. It happened exactly the same time in 2009 also, when the retail participation increased to 55 and institutional was 45. Retail generally is in the range of 35 to 40%. Today it has jumped 72 to 74% as compared to the institutional. The reason it is also happening, because again I'm saying TINA factor. What option you have? Real estate, gold, debt, sub 4%. You take higher risk, Franklin, accidents will happen to you. You take lower risk, it doesn't even solve for inflation. So my point is, again, I'm trying to bring down to the core point here is the trading. You can only be lucky, and unfortunately you can't be lucky perpetually, because law of averages catch up always. So you can make three times money, fourth or fifth time you will lose. Hence, look for equities in a wealth creation perspective, whether it is small cap, whether it is mid cap, whether it is large cap. Now, how do you compose it? That's the question which you asked. What should be the asset allocation from the current level? Very simple. Do you know, Aditya, why people actually become perturbed, or why they get anxiety when the markets correct by 30%? The reason it happens, because they are fully invested into a particular category of an asset class. If I am a bullish small cap guy, I would have 80-90% exposed to small cap. You do asset allocation. Very simply. Put your 5-7% into gold. Put your extra 3 years money, which is short-term money, into debt. Your real estate only for living. Balance everything into equities. In equities, 60% of your core should always be of high quality, high growth, large cap. Put your 25 to 30 bucks into mid cap. Put your 10 bucks into small cap. Whether the market will fall by 15%, by 30%, you will not shake, because all your composition is intact. And if you stay put with this fundamental rule, you will not have challenges.
Siddharth have beautifully summed up overall asset allocation metrics, and this is really goes well. Even if we follow this kind of a thumb rule, I believe this logic. 3 years if you are taking care of with with your liquidity, so that can be easily those jittery times, pandemic times or recession times, it can be easily been taken care of. So equity needs patience. Yes, 3 years is nothing a game. We need 5, 7, 10 years definitely, and people remain invested there. So it's no point. Even mutual funds or people invest in a lot of direct assets. They don't look at it even. When you don't look at it, your real estate there, that is also kind of an equity. Look at last 10 years return of real estate. What they have given you, not even beaten inflation even. So no point. Even get a dividend at least from the equities and better than real estate. So yes, let's coming back to that our slides. This overall when you say on the slide that's the pandemic proof portfolio, or even when we say recession proof or so those portfolios, but how those portfolios only comes, these are defensive portfolios, pandemic proof portfolios. So how much flexible in your strategy of when you talk about coffee can or a good and clean, both are excellent strategies. So as an investor, if I come to you, so how much flexible you are at the month of March and April last year, were able to defense that fall into your portfolio compared to the Nifty or Nifty 100. So how that flexibility? Did you went to change your sector allocation? Did you went to change some other? Or no, you changed your further game for the next 1 year?
So Manish, you can answer this, but let me just give an analogy here. So Aditya, do you all the military personnel or people who go into the Naxalite area who fight the terrorists, they always wear bulletproof. They wear bulletproof jackets and they protect their body with the armor for a simple reason. Not for the 99 times when the bullet will miss hitting them, but for the one time where the bullet can hit straight in their heart. Wealth creation strategy is exactly simple. You don't have to worry about during good times, because during good times everything will move in line. Something will move up by 50%, something will move up by 52%, something will move up by 54%, 49%, does not matter. 1-2% on the upside does not matter. What you have to protect is when the catastrophe happens. You have to protect when the calamity happens, when the crisis happened. Are you protecting your drawdowns? Are you protecting your downside? Are you protecting your bottom? If you are correcting by 40%, remember, just to come back to your principle, you have to give 75%. You have only gone down by 40%, but you have to deliver 75% returns from your base to come back to your principle. On the other side, if you have only fallen by 10%, you have to come up by 11-12%, right? And I think Manish can talk about his strategy, because Manish's fund corrected by merely 10-11% when in March, April, the Nifty corrected by nearly 30-odd%.
Yeah, I also want Manish to add on to his, when he answers this, is how we are better off with the risk-adjusted return, how we are better off than mutual funds,
Yeah. No, so what Siddharth said was very right, that when you look at Coffee Can's journey in the last 4 years, we've delivered double-digit returns every single calendar, right? Minimum returns in a single calendar year in the last 4 years have been 15%. And this is through periods of time, right? This is in 2017 and 2019 and 20 when the equity markets were on a hormonal rampage of bull run. And it was in 2018 also when everything was kind of down in the dumps. But having said that, what we try to do are 2-3 very simple things. One is to have a very dynamic policy of constant analysis of risk versus reward, right? And that itself ensures that wherever the balance goes out of a little whack and a little comfort, you kind of start culling those positions a little bit. You start taking a little bit of money out of those positions, and you kind of manage your risk a little better. So if I give an analogy on the same side, you look at 2019, we were sitting on 2% cash at the start of the year. We ended the year with about 15% cash, right? And that kind of ensured that when 2020 came on our head and the pandemic came on our head, we were actually to be able to protect that returns. So that is point number one. And the second thing what we try and do on a constant basis is to have a twin-pronged policy of evaluation. Sector call, top-down, stock calls, bottom-up. So you always got to keep evaluating the economic situation and keep taking a top-down view in terms of which sectors can benefit out of the current situation over the next 2 to 3 years, and then accordingly place your bets. So last year, for example, we decided to bet on organized retail in terms of Avenue Supermart and life insurance, which was HDFC Life Insurance, which were both great calls. We've already made 30-35% returns in Avenue Supermarts, right, in the last 1 year. And this year, we've betted on financials and consumer discretionary. So Titan is a new inclusion into the portfolio. ICICI Bank is a new inclusion into the portfolio. So that dynamics keep changing on an ongoing basis depending on how the economy is behaving. And a combination of both these simple things, I think, make us always deliver as consistently as we do.
Yeah, that's really right. We have to keep identifying. That doesn't happen with when you are directly investing in equity. You need time, money, and also that for a client who have wealth to invest. If he does this, meeting corporate teams, meeting earning calls, and all those stuffs, it's very difficult. So taking help of managers like you, who are on the ground, meeting these people, understanding what is happening on the ground, it means a lot. And that comes to the portfolio also.
So you said it very rightly, Aditya. You have money, we have all the time in the world, and when money meets time, it becomes a very winning combination.
Yeah, absolutely. But here, just I want because our audience is also a lot of audience which invest in mutual funds.
Right.
So they definitely want to graduate to the PMS. They also want to understand that how it is different, and as in tax treatment or as in structure wise, what flexibility it gives to the fund manager. That point, if you can give some time.
So I'll start, and then technical part, Siddharth can take over because he's an expert on that. But I always believe that more than anything else, what is important is the purpose of investing. Why are you investing that money? That should determine the vehicle you're choosing, right? So mutual fund is a great investment avenue, but it's primarily meant for SIPs, right? 7,000, 10,000, 20,000 accumulated over long periods of time, which make it into a great pool of savings, right? When you look at PMSs, they are typically meant for long-term investments, but a sizable chunk of money which can be customized. So purpose of investment becomes really important. For example, PPF gives you great returns, right? 7 to 9% compounded return at any given point of time. Now, if you park your liquid money in that, the returns are great. But when you need it for an emergency, can you utilize that fund? No. So the returns don't mean anything at all, right? So I think that is essentially how different things are. Mutual funds are meant for a different class of investors, and PMSs are meant for a different purpose of investing altogether. So that I'll let you add on to that.
Sure. So Aditya, remember that first thing why mutual fund and PMS differ. The first basic fundamental is mutual funds are to ensure that equity culture starts. Now, remember, the equity mutual fund investor can be a person who is investing 500 rupees to 5,000 rupees, nothing against. But a person who has relatively modest sums of money will always compare, right? So mutual funds generally tend to benchmark against the index. That's about it. So if the Nifty is giving you -5 and your mutual fund is giving you -4, you are the king. But that does not mean anything, because the challenge would remain still the wealth is not created. However, the PMS, at least the ones which we run, the idea is to generate market neutral returns, which means we should try and give, irrespective of the market, we should pick up businesses which have consistent EPS growth, which translate into the stock price movement. That's what. Irrespective of where the market is, irrespective of where the index is. So I'm not in that race of beating the index. I'm in the race of generating positive absolute returns, market neutral returns. So that's number one. And we have always spoken that preservation, modest growth is better than steep cuts anytime, right? So that's how you create wealth. So that's number one. Number two, the biggest and the most important benefit which PMS provides is the segregation of assets. What do you mean by that? It means that if a large investor in a mutual fund comes in, let's assume the mutual fund size is 1000 crores and there is an investor who comes in with a 300 crores and the markets are peaking out. What will happen? The fund manager now has 1300 crores. He will buy incremental equity at a top and the NAV will get averaged out amongst all the investors, which means everybody will eventually buy at a higher price. Similarly, if of this 1300 crores, a large investor of 500 crore exits, then the mutual fund manager has no choice. In a falling market, has to sell the most liquid securities, and the most illiquid securities will be left to the rest of the investors, which means despite of investing during falls, you do not have the right to control your own destiny. You are not the master of your destiny. You are not the captain of your ship. Somebody else is driving it. Whilst in PMS, once your portfolio is bought, it is in your demat. Irrespective of how many people come, how many people leave, market falls, market rises, there is no movement on your stock price of your purchasing price. So that's number two. Number three, fortunately, SEBI has said that every year end, the PMS manager has to give threadbare every rupee expense statement audited by a third party auditor to the investor, stating how much money has been spent, where it has been spent, how it has been spent, capital gains reports, everything. So the investor knows, looking at that sheet, what all he has spent, how much money he has made, how much capital gains is there, everything threadbare. Fortunately or unfortunately, in mutual fund, everything is pooled in. A large investor whose exit load has been charged or not charged gets clubbed into the scheme. You don't even know what's happening. Everything is a part of the scheme. So the problem is, in pooling, you don't know what, where, how you are spending. So these three simple things ensure that your portfolio does better under PMS: market neutral returns, transparency of cost, non-impact of any entry and exit. These are the very three simple things which are beneficial over and above in PMS as compared to any other mode of investing in equities.
Just along with that, these times, a lot of PMS strategies have restructured their cost structure, exit strategies. So when we talk about Ambit, how we have placed our various fee structures, there is, earlier used to be a time of a fixed cost, now no more a days, it's a time of volume now. People are changing their structures, people are becoming more, products are becoming more and more feasible for the clients to enter now. And it's no more mutual funds are cheaper, PMSs are also cheaper. You get a best fund managers at a best possible cost. That too now various strategies is with Ambit. So how do we, can we have a small word on your existing price structures? Yeah.
So we are the first ones. We are the first ones in the industry, and we take proud, Manish and I, we take proud in saying that in 2015, when there was no variable structure, we were the first ones to come out with a full variable structure. What does that mean? It means the client wins, advisor wins, and then Ambit wins. If client loses, advisor loses, Ambit loses. So we all are in the same boat and all have common interest, client, client, client. If the client loses, so we were the first ones to introduce the full variable structure. You don't pay anything fixed, barring the statutory cost of stamping and custodian cost, which is negligible, which is less than 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3%. Nothing you pay, nothing. You don't pay any fees until unless you make money. We were the first ones to start this, and we take pride that a lot of people have copied from us. And today we have revolutionized the industry by ensuring that the client's interest is taken into account. So I would only leave it at that we have fixed cost structure and the variable cost structure, and we have structures where the client pays when he or she makes money, and should he does not make money, he does not pay me, he or she does not pay me anything. Although my costs are fixed, but I have no right to charge when the client is not making money.
Right. So do we have a kind of a hybrid of both the worlds, mixed?
So we have hybrid as well. So we have mix of both the worlds as well. We have a hybrid as well, where client can opt for certain amount of fixed fee and the certain amount of variable fees. The client can opt for that.
Great. So this makes really sense actually. The cost structure making at par with the mutual fund, or even the performance based. So it's no more all exclusive stuff now. It's as good as even somebody who is having a 3 or 4 crore of a mutual fund portfolio want to have a flavor of a PMS dedicated manager, onboarded for his stocks. It's a wise decision even to go with PMS stuff. Yeah. It's no point here. We are not propagating any. It's all about wealth planning, goal planning based on asset allocation. So it's not about PMS only. It's about equities today. So idea is to understand market and going forward. So it's pretty clear, by both the guests of ours, is that we don't have to just bog down by smaller noises. These are all noises which will come and go. This is 15-20 days. Market will reflect some depression, but we have already gone by those bad times. Already that is over. The phase is over. Now the phase is clean. Slate is clean. We are from here on next 3, 5, 6, 7 years, spanning out beautifully, clean slate. So just want to add on here, from the Manish, I would like to ask one question. How do you see GDP growth from here on in the next 1 or 2 years? Because we have been in the lower base. We had a negative base last year. So from here it looks, yes, we are coming back. But it was a negative base. So should we see 2020 and 22, not 2021, where we close? So how that looks like?
Your point is very right that on a base of -7.5%, whatever you see in FY22 is essentially going to be a mean reversion, right? And in that respect, what you got to still understand is that 13%, which we were expecting at the beginning of the year in around February, March, looked very attractive. But in essence, what you are trying to do is to go back to what you were in FY20, right? And achieve that $2.7, $2.8 trillion of absolute GDP amount by that time. And then the pandemic hit us. But I think financially, the pandemic has been pretty well managed. And our analysis, and we've done pretty extensive work around it, shows that everybody's kind of underestimating the rebound in the economy from this pandemic. And you'll still see around 11.5% kind of a GDP growth rate accruing this year, right? So in that sense, it's just been about 2 percentage points of shaving off from the economy, as far as the pandemic is concerned. But the fact of the matter is, vaccination drive is now at the cusp of picking up pace. And that makes me believe that the recovery in GDP growth rate, not just globally, but in India as well, is going to be sustainable. And you should expect a high single-digit CAGR of GDP growth rate from the next 2 to 3 years perspective. You should expect at least a 11% to 11.5% kind of a GDP growth rate this year, at least a 8 to 9% kind of a GDP growth rate accruing again in FY22. And then again, the year after that, you should expect at least a 6 to 7% kind of a GDP growth rate. 8-9% compounded GDP growth rate, and at least a 13 to 15% kind of a compounded earnings growth in Nifty from a next 3 years perspective. And that's the reason why we are so bullish on equity, because the structural growth phase has now just started. You're at the cusp of it.
And I want to thank each one of the participants here. But before doing that, I want Siddharth to put some bit on his 1.5 lakh Sensex figure. When he says 1.5 lakh, what are some critical points if we do right? India does right. So how we achieve? And by that, I want to thank all you attendees here who are here. We as at Wellesley, always all time available with you. Please get in touch with us in case of your any wealth queries. And I just want to end up from Siddharth, on his 1.5 lakh Sensex figure. Yeah.
So India needs to do only 3 things right: less governance, more business. So that's number 1. Less governance, less government intervention, more business. So that's number 1. Second, lesser bureaucracy, more digitization, more transparency. That's number 2. And number 3, focus on what you have, what you can do, rather than figuring out what externally people can do for you. And that's what India has been doing. Focus on your services, focus on your demographics, focus on education, focus on healthcare. And today, India has dropped from $3 trillion in February of 2020 to $2.8 trillion. And my reckoning is by 2031, $2.8 trillion will be $10 trillion economy. You can guess what Sensex on Nifty then will be.
Great, Siddharth. Thank you very much to all attendees. At Wellesley, we always propagate asset allocation as an investment technique and balance risk among assets such as cash, bonds, stocks, funds, alternatives. Each asset class has different level of return and risk. So do it very carefully. Do talk with your advisors. Wellesley advisors are always available. So by this, we should not go overboard. Yes, it is very important what Siddharth is talking about. Equity is the only which can give you that kicker in your portfolio. Because next 10 years are a lower interest rate time. So don't think that your PPF will gonna give you 7% consistently. Government needs headroom. So you have to think beyond that. So your debt bank has to grow. So bank would not be happy to give you even FD at 5%. So we have to think on those lines. So still the asset allocation is important. So, we have to be on the ground, but all is in the asset allocation. So here at Wellesley, we are building India's first assisted digital wealth management platform. So for now, I'm taking a bye, and it was very kind of all the attendees to attend for this period of time. And thanks to all our guests, speakers from Ambit and their team. Thanks to my team as well to be there and attending this. Yeah. See you everyone.
Jai Hind. God bless you all.
Yeah, Jai Hind.